So will jetzt beieinander sitzen.
That's the,
Gottes Mutter in der Mitte.
that's the wonderful picture. The way we sit together in a circle, the Blessed Mother right in our midst.
Das ist ja auch, wenn ich zu Hause bin.
That's also when I'm at home.
Da ist Vater und Mutter, da sind die Kinder.
Morning, everyone. It's the Grace and Michael Gleason family from Pewaukee. We live about 15 minutes from the shrine on Cherry Lane. And we've been here, we moved from California about almost 11 years ago. So I'd like to share my screen just briefly so I can show you a photograph of our family. This is a photo taken about 3 years ago. We were dropping off one of our children. The oldest 5 have all chosen the same Catholic college out in Wyoming for their higher learning after leaving home. So we have our daughter Susan is our oldest. She's on the far left of the screen. And she's 25. Then Hannah's 24. Hannah's over here on the almost one over from the right. Our oldest son Farley, standing between Susan and Michael, and then our son John Henry and our son Hiram, who are on either side of Hannah. All those 3 boys are still students at Wyoming Catholic. Susan lives in Lander, the town where the college is now, after graduating a couple years ago. And Hannah just finished her Montessori teacher diploma in Dallas just this week. And then we have still living at home with us Georgia, who's now 17, and Davy, who is 13 and taller than all of us now. So this shows how much can happen in just 3 years. As I said, we moved from California about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. And when we were leaving California, Michael had lost his job. We needed to find new employment and a new place to live because of the cost of living in California with 7 children. We knew we would have a struggle there as a stay-at-home mom and a teacher. So we were praying to Our Lady before we left California to please help us find a home that would be near one of her shrines. And interestingly, we came back to Wisconsin. Michael's father grew up in the Milwaukee area, but we had also been here as a married couple in our newlywed days before, well, actually during my pregnancy with Susan, our firstborn, she was born here. But Michael was a student taking some of his Montessori training in Milwaukee, and we were here and we had come to know and love Holy Hill as a Marian shrine, of course more famous in some ways than Schoenstatt, locally anyway.
For us at the time.
And at the time, that was the shrine that we had in mind when we left California. Certainly we were happy that we had settled on the idea of moving here, but little did we know, and it's too long of a story to go into the details, but Our Lady had other plans for us, and it was in fact a Carmelite from Holy Hill that directed me in spiritual direction that I should be contacting the Schoenstatt, a priest at Schoenstatt, to be my next spiritual director because my Carmelite spiritual director had died. So that was just an interesting little interlude, but we ended up as a family really falling in love with Schoenstatt. Michael and I have been members of a couples group that meets at least monthly for about 8 or 9 of those years that we've been here. And it's just been a lifeline for us as parents and as a married couple. So our topic is going to be education or formation, not strictly speaking academic education, but the formation of our family and of our children specifically. So I made some notes from this is all taken from some notes that actually Sister Isabel shared with us that were also taken from the volume number 1 of the Monday night talks that Father shared with the couples. And these were talks and gatherings that they had in March through June of 1955. So, so just to take the 50,000 foot view of education, you have, when you're talking about education or formation, you have the one that's going to be educated and you have the one that is educating. And of course, God, our Father in heaven, he's our first educator. He created us. He knows what he wants for us in terms of our formation, but he uses secondary causes or instruments. He makes use of other people in our lives to help us along our way. And we are on our way to God our Father, and through Mary, who is his perfect instrument, he invites us to entrust ourselves to her as our mother, and she entrusts herself to us as our mother and takes us as her children. And Father Kentenich had this wonderful idea of Mary being the great educator. Of course, she and Joseph educated Jesus, the God-man himself, in their home in Nazareth. And that was planned from all eternity, that when God was anticipating his incarnation, he wanted it to be within the family, within a married life, of the married couple of Joseph and Mary, and the family growing together closer and closer to God throughout their lives together. So that's our great, as Sister Isabel said, that's our great ideal, is the Holy Family. And we have this entrustment. Jesus from the cross, I'm sure everybody knows from the cross his famous words to St. John and to Our Lady, entrusting them to each other. And Mary really takes that to heart. She takes us to her heart and educates us, her other children, right? So she's helping us to educate ourselves. This was Father Kentenich's firm understanding, that Mary wants to help us first to educate ourselves so that we can be instruments in her hands, and in turn then we will assist her in the education of our children and grandchildren. So it's kind of this beautiful way that God has structured how he communicates to us, how he wants to form us through these other people in our lives. And as parents, we're given the task to be the primary educators of our children. And in the home, if you think about it, even in the earliest years, the hearts of our children are being formed. In fact, before they ever go to school, the hearts have already been, these deep impressions have already been made on their hearts, and those impressions are going to be carried in our children throughout their lives and into our grandchildren's lives, and hopefully into their great-grandchildren's lives. So it really makes this incredible impact on the future generations of our family, how we form ourselves, or how we cooperate in the formation of ourselves, our self-education. So as a married couple, of course, Father Kentenich wanted to help the couples realize that they needed to grow together. And this would be a continual sort of an ongoing project of God's to help them continue their lifelong striving to become the saints that God wants us to become. And in doing so, we become the examples that our children are going to model. Father Kentenich had a very unique way of expressing the basic teachings of the faith, and you can find everything he says, you can find it in the teachings of the church and the philosophy and the theological teachings of the church. But he had a very, as Sister said, he told stories, and he used images and symbols to help make it more clear what he was trying to help the couples to understand about themselves and about their families. And he talks about, in these early talks, he talks about our composite nature. So we have bodies and souls. We have an animal, there's part of our being that's on an animal level. We have senses and emotions and imagination, all the sort of physical faculties, and the kind of blend. I don't know exactly what an emotion is. You have physical tears, but it starts somewhere in the spirit that you have those tears of joy or tears of sorrow. And then we have our spiritual side, our intellect and our will. And then Father also, he didn't want to just talk about the animal and the angel in us. He also wanted to call their attention to the fact that we are children of God. Through our baptism, we are and that's a third way of looking at ourselves, is that we're baptized, and so therefore we become the children of God, truly the children of God. And Father wanted to point out and help us to realize that we need first to master ourselves so that the higher faculties will govern the lower, since, of course, original sin has disrupted everything for us. Unlike Mary and Jesus and the Holy Family, we have this disruption. And I think St. Joseph comes in so close to perfect because he was given those graces to be made ready to be the husband of Mary and the father of Jesus in the home at Nazareth. Those are the three perfect people. We're not perfect, and we have a struggle against the disruption that original sin has caused. And Father didn't want us to get upset about that. He just wanted to make it clear to us that that's what we're struggling against. So, and that we have all the helps we need to conquer in that struggle. So we're going to be working on rooting out of ourselves any habits that go contrary to the well-being of our family. And Father was just very clear, if it doesn't serve the family, it probably has to go. And Michael and I have, over the years recognized things that we had attachments to that didn't really suit us as a married couple. Maybe at one time they did, and then as the family grew, it just falls to the wayside. Even if it might have been good in itself, it's the needs of the family that determine what kinds of things we hold on to and what kinds of things we let go. And especially anything that is sinful has to go. So, and sisters remarked already that Father warned the couples, you're going to see your defects in your children, but that's God's way of making you aware of your defects. So if you see something bad that you don't like in your children, you want to look at yourself and say, where did that come from? Is that something I do? And you'll probably find out, oh yeah, I do that. So you root out these bad habits and replace them with developing good habits. And so, so we're working on ourselves. We're mastering the confusion that's in ourselves because of original sin, so that we can be at peace with ourselves and with God and with each other. And then it's this peaceful, joyly daily life that's going to be the foundation of our children's security. So we're cultivating these habits. I have a PDF that I'll make available. There's a wonderful man, Dr. Richard Fitzgibbons, who's written a brand new book. He's been in the field of helping married couples for 40 years. He's a good Catholic. And he recognized that there are certain virtues that if you could acquire them even before getting married, it would be a good thing. So, but they're the virtues that he helps couples who are struggling in marriage to pay attention to, so they can develop those things, and it will help them through maybe a difficult marriage because they don't have good habits yet. So I'll share that PDF later, but that's just an aside. But these good habits lead to a happy home. And of course, a happy home does not mean a home that's free of difficulties and trials, and we're going to have both joys and sorrows lived together in our family life. Father Kentenich would say the path to heaven is the way of the cross. And we're going to have both roses and thorns along the way. Another concept, so he had this concept of focusing on developing self-education of the adults and the other adults that we might responsibly entrust with our children, because of course our children are our greatest treasures, so we can't just, we have to be careful who we allow to have an influence on them when they're under our care. But if we choose wisely, then the other adults that we entrust to our children to will also be working on this idea of rooting out the bad and replacing it with the good things, the good habits. So another wonderful idea that Father Kentenich, when he's talking about the formation of our families and of our children, is this idea of constant living contact. So he had a beautiful phrase, the great educator is a lover who never leaves the one he loves. And so the parents and the children, of course, in a family, we live together. We're under the same roof all the time. And it's in our ordinary daily lives, which give us so many opportunities for giving of ourselves and taking an interest in each other, in each other's wants and needs, and finding ways to serve each other, and in general, just striving to be everyday saints. It's sort of an ordinary way, but it's what God wants for us for the most part. And school and church and other institutions can supplement that, but they don't ever replace the family. Freedom was another idea of Father Kentenich that he really properly understood. He wanted the couples to understand freedom rooted in truth. So he had another saying, which Michael and I love because it's a kindred spirit with the Montessori approach to education. But Father used to say, as much freedom as possible, as few rules as necessary. So based on the truth, our job is to come to know what God has put in the child in order that we can serve the child as God wants us to serve the child and according to his plan for the child. So each original child, so there are many personalities to be responsible for, as many personalities as there are children. So if you have one child, you have one personality. If you have 3 children, you have 3 different personalities, and they all have their different likes and dislikes, their different blend of temperament, their different abilities and inabilities, and it's our job. He had another fun expression, you can't get plums off of a pear tree. And we should know that about ourselves too. If you're a pear tree, don't try to get plums off of yourself. Just know yourself and come to know each child. It's a sort of an ongoing effort to know each child because their needs change as they develop and mature. And especially he wants us to pay attention to growing in grace, and of course never to lose our life of grace, our interior life, the prayer life, staying close to the sacraments, and just learning how to love God and love our neighbor and each other as we go along. And then lastly, in my reflections, I noticed that in these talks, Father was wanting to show about Our Lady, as tender and gentle and loving as she is in so many ways with us, she's also very strong. So Our Lady allowed herself to be educated by God and by those that he placed in her life to be with her in Nazareth. And she allowed herself to be educated and learn those things that she had to do and live in order to be transformed. Now, of course, she was immaculate from the beginning, but she grew nonetheless in perfection in these ways, so that she could become ever more fully the image of the Trinity that God wanted for her. And he has this image in his mind from all eternity for each one of us. So there's a Latin phrase that Fr Kentenich would use, alter Christus, just means another Christ. And Mary is given to us as our mother to help us to be formed into an image of Christ. And we entrust ourselves to her so that she can help us to become other Christs. We're each an unrepeatable image of the triune God. And each of our children, if we look at them, sort of in our deeper ponderings about our children, if we think about that he from all eternity has had an image of our child and a desire for our child that we can help if we're deeply tuned into that. And Fr Kentenich just took it for granted that in order to become other Christs, we were going to be led down this path of both roses and thorns. So he said the way to heaven is the way of the cross, and we'll mature along the way. It's a gradual thing, and we see it in Mary's own life. She came to a more perfect trust. I mean, I think her trust must have been perfect from the beginning. She made her fiat, be it done unto me according to thy word, at the beginning, but she also we do see a change in her. Maturity, so the confusion that she and Joseph went through when they were seeking for the lost boy Jesus, and they found him in the temple, that confusion and anxiety is gone when she stands at the foot of the cross. And he had promised her and Joseph in the temple when he was just 12 years old, I must be about my Father's work. So we have to expect that in our own lives, we're going to encounter the cross and sorrow, and intertwined with all the blessings and joys that we experience as a family. That's what's going to forge our hearts into hearts like their hearts, like Joseph and Mary and Jesus's hearts. And it's made possible and it's made easier because of the devotedness of our great educator, as Fr Kentenich liked to call her, our great educator, the lover, the true mother who never leaves the ones that she loves. So I'm going to hand it over to my husband. Those are my reflections.
So in a minute, I'm going to share our screen because I want to give you an image that has grown on me. Well, it's not just an image. It's really the essence of Mary, Mother of God, for us, that in my life, I was neglecting. Having grown up in the 70s, it was this idea, false idea, was impressed on me that, oh, you don't need to go to Mary. You can go directly to God. It was kind of what my sisters were raised on, and I have 6 older sisters, and I kind of altered what my parents gave them, and I really received a lot of that message of, just go directly to God. You don't even need to, say prayers that we learned before. You can make up your own prayers. So it's really just this leaving of the resources that God has given us for the sake of this supposedly, allegedly more direct relationship with God. And so through marriage, I've come closer and closer to Mary, and we even almost moved right onto the same street that Schoenstatt was on. So it's like, oh wow, almost this amazing proximity to the shrine that we still live near there, here in Waukesha. But I want to begin with first a story of that constant living contact that Grace was referring to. But before I had that, I think as a parent, I want to say we began that with Schoenstatt, whether we wanted it or not, because Sister Marie Day had offered to drop off some things when we were just looking into this becoming members of a couples group. We didn't really know what it was, but we were beginning to form wonderful relationships with some couples who were interested in forming a couples group. Sorry, that darn rooster keeps getting in. No, that's Grace's phone. But anyway, Sister Marie Day was about to lead this new couples group, and she had some material. She said, oh, I could send them to you, but where do you live? And when she found out we were less than a mile off her beaten path between the International Shrine and the Exile Shrine, she which is on Wisconsin Avenue in Milwaukee, she said, oh, I'll just drop them by sometime this week whenever I'm near there. And so that was in the back of our mind. And we said, great, we always leave the front door open, just put it on the kitchen table. And so that was going to be wonderful. We'd get to know more about what this couples group would be. And meanwhile, just to give you an idea where I was as a father, I was always trying to come up with the perfect consequence to teach my children to stop doing bad habits, root out the bad. And our boys were young at the time. They were all busy. We're always playing baseball and so forth, the whole family. But the boys had this habit at the time. They were always riding their bikes around the driveway and garage, and they had the habit of leaving their bikes at the bottom of the stairs, and the stairs that go from our front porch to the driveway. And finally, I said, boys, if I find any bicycles at the bottom of the stairs, you're going to find them in the trees. I'm going to hang them from the trees. You'll have to work your way down. I'll have to work it down. But, just one of those irrational parenting moments, but also trying to teach a lesson. I mean, I'm a teacher, and I hadn't been home very much before that. I was always in the classroom, and the job that that got us to be able to transition out to Wisconsin, this was online, doing Greek and Latin with people in Massachusetts. So it was like, I was home, and I was starting to see what real parenting looks like. It's like, oh my goodness. I thought, I'll have to come up with a lesson for everything. And so anyway, I was, sure enough, 2 of them left 2 bikes, and I found a maple tree that I could hang these bikes in from the handlebars. And anyway, right that same day, Hannah wanted to play catch, and she and I were playing catch with my back to the garage. And at the end of every game of catch, we throw harder and harder and faster, make it more, see who drops the ball. And whoosh, right over my head. Hannah puts a fastball right through the van window. Our 15-seater van now had little broken cubes all over. And while we're staring in awe at the mess we've just created and the big expense, everyone comes pouring out of the house saying, we're late to mass. It's earlier than we thought. So we had to leave right then. So off to mass we go, and we come back only to find that this was the day that Sister Marie took us up on the offer to leave those things on the kitchen table. So she returns to find shattered glass all over the driveway beside the van and bicycles growing from the maple tree.
And burned muffins.
And burned muffins. I
In
had
the
forgotten
kitchen.
about the burned muffins. So it was just like she was seeing the soft underbelly of the Gleason family. And I was reminded of the lesson that I tried to teach my children. But over the years, and especially through these couples groups, and especially through these books, the talks on Monday evenings, we started with book 20, which floored us and made us want to read more. And then Sister Isabel recommended volume 1 for our couples group. We were like, perfect. And then the Dome meetings were going to begin with book 1. So it's like, this is all coming together. And I read the background of the March to June talks of 1955, while Grace concentrated on the book, the March to June that didn't get their dates. So that's where you can find that in volume 1, what Grace spoke about. So I just wanted to highlight what Father Kentenich talks about between March and June in the other sections that back up what Grace was detailing in Father Kentenich's notes. And so I have some notes here, but I just want to take you up that tree that I originally hung the bicycles in, because one of the main images that Father Kentenich talks about is that of the mediatrix. And so Grace is going to share our screen for a slideshow. Our daughter Georgia, the one on, if we're sharing screen yet? Yeah, the daughter here on the left. Just during the pandemic, she's been climbing that same tree every day, about 12 feet up. She's been taking pictures of, in this little photos session. Yeah. She started as things began to bud. Now we've had snow, plenty of snow, even like 10 days ago, we've had flurries. But the buds are finally starting to come out. And George has been photographing these buds once a day over the last few weeks. And so she included a few for me in a slideshow. I thought if we can just change one image and add to our image of Mary as mediatrix. Father Kentenich emphasizes this. It's, centuries old teaching from the church fathers that not a single grace comes to us that doesn't come through Mary. And so, it's enough for people to realize not a single grace from God the Father comes to us that doesn't come through God, the second person, the Word, and Christ who became man. And so God allowed himself to come through Mary, a person, a human being. And that got me thinking about the flower. In Montessori, we tell the story of how the flower, it's as if the flower is attracting the bee that pollinates it. But, within that flower, the pollen unites with the ovule and forms inside fruit that grows. It forms the seed. And from that seed grows the tree. If we think of the true tree as God allows that flower to do the job. God allows all that the tree is to become to go through that fragile flower that passes away. And so when I get the image of flowers, my original image when I read this first book on Monday evenings of John Horning filling the shrine with roses for the couples, the 6 couples who were originally going to make their covenant of love. at first I was thinking, oh, that's nice. But Father Kentenich was totally delighted with this, the idea that, that he had an image to give them, but it wasn't a dead image. This idea of, it wasn't just decoration of the shrine. Father Kentenich did something very strange at first to them, and they understood later that he asked them to take these flowers home with them, but to bring them back the next time they came to the shrine. And why would he do this unless the flower has this great significance beyond just like the dead image of a symbol, a mere symbol of Mary, Mother of God, the mystical rose. I mean, the fact that she's mystical, she's still living in this exchange. He said the exchange of flowers is like the exchange of hearts. So bringing them back, you're bringing to the capital of grace, you're contributing your all. He says, so here I just have to, I'm gonna glance at his notes, say it's an exchange of hearts. We want to give all our possessions, all our interests. We want to place them at Mary's disposal. And then, so what is it? He says, in the great revelations of Mary throughout time, it was God saying, God originally said, let there be light, but now it's as if God is saying, let there be Mary. And we have all these apparitions, like Fatima, for example. He said, it's not just to pray the rosary. Mary's message at Fatima has us then to live that constant sacrifice. And so let there be Mary within the darkness of original sin. And from her, let there be the light of redemption. And so this idea of placing things at Mary's feet, what keeps us from placing things at Mary's feet is usually that we don't complete them. God says, or I'm sorry, Father Kentenich points out that God asks of us in justice our duty, to do our duty, that we fulfill our duties with faith and conscientious, fulfill our duties faithfully and conscientiously, to earn merits and place them at Mary's disposal. But if you think about it, what keeps us from placing them at Mary's feet? It's if we haven't done them faithfully, we recognize, oh, I didn't do them as faithfully as I intended. The temptation is to say, well, then I can't. And you think how ridiculous that is. For example, if someone is not having a great acting day on stage, imagine if they just walk out in the middle of a play because they're just not doing it. So it's ridiculous from common sense point, but from our experience, we tend to withhold from God offering things that we don't think we've done well enough on. So that's pride. But the other thing that keeps us from offering, so it's our failure to fulfill our duty that keeps us from offering that to Mary. But it's also our success that keeps us from offering it. When we do succeed in fulfilling our duty, the temptation is to be proud and then to claim credit ourselves. So the deal is, the exchange of hearts is that Mary says, if you offer them to me, not just your success, but also your failure, I will settle among you and draw hearts to me. And so I can't emphasize enough that I've learned through Schoenstatt, I don't have to come up with perfect offerings to God, and I don't have to come up with perfect lessons for my children. I have instead to do my best at all times through self-education, as Father emphasizes. If we have self-education through what he calls the particular examen, get to know first ourselves. Self-education is the beginning of education of our children. Our society, our modern culture puts means to solving problems at the foreground, he says, and it puts spiritual culture in the background. But the particular examen helps us bring those spiritual and supernatural goals to the foreground and to strengthen our personalities by getting to know ourselves. As Grace had said, to master the confusion of ourselves helps with self-education. And as a Schoenstatt member, a Deacon Henry here, or my spiritual director, emphasized with me, offering is a lifestyle. So keep offering. When you fail, offer the failure. When you succeed, don't take any credit, offer the success. And this then becomes our approach. We approach, she gives confidence and trust to us, and then she rules as our queen and great educator. And so, don't let pride stop us from offering our failures to God, and don't let pride stop us from offering, don't let pride make us keep our success for ourselves and fail to offer it. But then she will settle among us and draw hearts to us. And Father Kentenich says, just practically, as a parent, we don't need to come up. He says, we parents think we need to show our strength and beauty. But no, we must conquer anger. We must master the animal in ourselves. And our eyes will reflect the beauty. So what is a reflection but what's outside? The children in front of us. Our eyes will reflect their beauty, and they will recognize themselves in us. When there's just a funny story that Father Kentenich refers to, that he says, we must learn to tame our animal nature. As Grace said, we must learn to tame our animal nature as Alexander the Great learned to tame a horse. He's referring to his horse Bucephalus. As a young child, Alexander the Great watched older horse trainers fail one after another with their great lessons they had for horse training to tame this greatest but most dangerous of all horses, Bucephalus. And it was offered to the one who could tame it, because not a single great trainer among the Arabs could tame this horse. And as a young boy, an 11-year-old boy, Alexander the Great watched one after another fail and said, "May I try?" And they all laughed, but they gave him permission. And with the reins, Alexander the Great turned the horse away from its own shadow. Using his mind and his observation of the animal, he recognized that the horse was afraid of its own shadow. And so by constantly keeping it out of its sight from its own shadow, and little by little introducing it to the sight of its own shadow, he tamed this horse, rode this horse in front of all these great Arabian horse trainers, and he won the horse, which he kept for his life as a general. And which reminds us also, Alexander the Great never would take a meal until he had learned that all his soldiers had been fed. So although there's plenty about Alexander you don't want to imitate, I love that Father Kentenich points us to this practical wisdom of taming the animal in ourselves first, through observation, which brings us back to the particular examine that Father Kentenich recommends daily. If we write down our personal ideal and we aim at that throughout, but we use our particular examine to know, he says, if you write it down, it helps in 3 ways, but I'm going to focus on one of those ways, that it helps with forgetfulness. Not just forgetfulness of what you intend to do during the day, but also forgetfulness of what you have done over the past month. If you look over the past month and see that, every day, just this plain look, I offer you, Mary, the fact that for the last 6 days, I've forgotten to practice really my main goal for the month. Meanwhile, I've been caught up in the means rather than the supernatural ends. So you can offer that daily better if you've kept track, and you can have better confessions and better spiritual directions if you know yourself. And that is the person that Father Kentenich recommends taming first. So just as Grace mentioned that Mary grows in her maturity, despite the fact that she is without original sin, she grows in maturity. And at first she's feeling lost in the temple. I mean, lost when her son is lost. She feels lost as a parent, confused, but by the end, she's at the foot of the cross, confident and ready to receive humanity as her new son. Woman, behold thy son. And she models for us that we want to provide our children a home, but not one that is free, not one that is without the cross and suffering. The MTA went through what he called a very harsh school, but she kept all those things in her heart. She kept the thorns of the flower in her heart, along with the sweet smell. And these things that she noticed through mental prayer, through keeping these things in her heart, allowed her to do what Fr Kentenich tells us to do. All we really have to do as parents is to keep drawing our children's attention to the wonderful little bits of providence that God gives throughout the day. And then, just like Schoenstatt compared with what some people think of as greater apparitions of Mary, Schoenstatt did not begin with a great outward apparition, but rather Fr Kentenich just accepting divine providence. That if God was willing to come through Mary, just like a great tree through a passing flower, if God was willing to come through Mary, then so should we as the great educator. And so,
Mr. Gleason,
yeah,
we're running out of time.
Okay, so just in conclusion,
1 minute.
if we follow that mental prayer, we too will do what Fr Kentenich says: place all of ourselves, our whole self, on the paten of the offertory, become a victim with Christ, do everything throughout the day for God. And then, just as Mary said, behold, the handmaid of the Lord, and Christ said, behold, I come to do your will, we can say, as self-educated, we can say, behold, go ahead and sculpture me first before I sculpt my child out of this stone. Fr Kentenich says, be a great artist, be a great lover as an educator. As we sculpt our child and we allow the sufferings of life to sculpt our children, we don't want to flinch, as Saint Jose Maria Escrivá says, don't flinch or you become a pile of rubble. But as life sculpts us, as Fr Kentenich alludes to Michelangelo, God sees us inside the stone and sculpts us. So we don't need to invent our children with lessons. We just need to call their attention to the things in life that will sculpt them, and choose our purgatory now. And then we will not be putting education upon our children, but we will be letting it penetrate our hearts first, because a great lover never leaves his love.
Please repeat comment about we want to create a home.
So just as Mary did, Fr Kentenich says, sure, we parents should provide a home, but not without cross and suffering. We shouldn't pray that there be no suffering for our children, but rather the proper cross for our children, that the cross be appropriate to our children. That just as the rose, the mystical rose comes with the sweet smell and the thorns, and just as we would never want to deprive our children of being at the foot of the cross with humanity that God gives to Mother Mary, woman, behold thy son, we don't want to deprive the child of appropriate suffering, but only the suffering that doesn't have to do with what God is asking. So with much prayer, we have to discern, is this meant to be, or am I meant to help alleviate the pain? But Fr Kentenich says, don't cover up any falsehoods. Don't try to cover up the wrongs that our children do, but suffer them with our children. And we certainly don't need to teach lessons through suffering, because life has the sufferings if we suffer them with them. And just an example I could give, the priest who married us in 1993, told us when I was a young teacher, he told us the story of how his father told him, never be late. He was an Irishman. Never be late again, Lancelot. Your games are important, but not nearly as important as the family dinner. And he came home late the next day, a young, cocky athlete. He turned out to be an Olympic athlete, but young, cocky athlete, sorry, Dad, sorry. And he gets at the table and finds there's no meal at his place. And his father's sitting there with his meal, but no one has begun. They've all waited for him late, so the food has gotten a little cold. And he's like, yeah, I can take it. In his mind, he's saying, I can take it. And instead, the father says, okay, please sit down here. And the father stands up, gives him his place, his meal, and his father sits down at the empty place. Now, maybe that's a little more overt than we need to be to teach a lesson, but the father at least was willing to suffer the hunger for him. He said, I didn't eat as much as I would have, and I certainly didn't eat well, but my father ate less than I did. So if we can suffer with our children, I love the fact that at the end, Fr Kentenich says, never put lessons upon the children, but only be willing to put on your children what goes through your heart first. So every problem, whether it's a stinking worksheet of homework or a real, you've got to clean out that garage because look at the man. No, get down and do it with them. Suffer the consequences with them, and they won't want those consequences. Your children inherently don't like to cause you suffering, but it might seem that way when they leave their bikes out.
I'm seeing Janice's question a little bit more detailed, which is how do you help younger people to understand the hardships of life because they're not as mature as we are as adults? And I would say with great caution, because I just heard a story the other day of a young girl who grew up in France, and when her family would express the will of God, it was usually because of some suffering that they encountered. So their friend maybe had lost her husband to cancer, and they would say, oh, it's so sad, but she's going to have to accept it. That's God's will. And that kind of expression over and over again when she was a young girl impressed upon her heart that although she loved God and prayed and wanted to have him in her life, she did not see him like what his will would be something bad, some suffering, something that she wouldn't want. And so inadvertently her parents, with no intention to do so, had accidentally impressed upon her young heart that God's will is always suffering. So if we can show our children the meaning of suffering, and there's a lot written by we can't go into very long because I don't want to take up too much time, but I would say look around you and find good stories to tell or examples to show your children of people who have found the meaning of suffering in their life and are living it joyfully. So there's a young boy on Facebook now. He was just interviewed a couple weeks ago on EWTN. His name is Carson. He has an incurable skin disease that's very debilitating and difficult, but he prays every day the Chaplet of Divine Mercy and invites anyone who wants to come pray with him onto Facebook Live. This little guy, 13 years old, full of joy, full of fun, and he talks very matter-of-factly about his difficulties and sufferings, but he's just a great example. That's what I would, as a parent, you can introduce your children to other children who have a sort of suffering in their life that they're handling with joy. I would point to positive example, I guess.
Yeah,
so you don't accidentally give the children the impression that life is just all hard. Like my dad used to joke, life's hard and then you die. So we better stop talking because I think we're going over time.
And just one quick, Fr Kentenich's words are that we need very few words when talking about those sufferings, but rather to let their concerns be our concerns and their joys be our joys. We suffer with them, we joy with them.